Today is June 18th, 2023. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Mekoche Chestakomaki, or Ikots Nagotine Siku. Hi, my name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake Tribe in Treaty 11. My name is Dekots Nagotine Siku. My people were rabbit skin, so it's been referred to as the land of the hair people. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower, a daughter of the American Revolution, while having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card. That is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous to spirit or the Indigenous to LGBTQ2 plus community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socio-economic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft via policy. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share my journey as I walk my red road. As a Dene woman who has attempted to run and joined harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allows the incarceration, the denial of justice, a denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples. I have worked to continue reports to advocate for and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I think of all of this today. I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this so-called country named Canada. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride Month should never just be one month. It's important to understand that the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on this land by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as the guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. It's also important your land acknowledgements have meaning. I encourage everyone to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors, stories of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. That's how come I always know when people don't listen to my podcast, when they go to introduce themselves and they don't do any of those things I just said. If you don't know how to pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, won't pronounce your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, imposed economic oppression, your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around myself, my family, my community. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from, Native Torontonian, Native Edmontonian, you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winte's book Unreconciled explains it perfectly, as do many Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism and capitalism, but it would also be a part of a treaty partnership, meaningful reconciliation, honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. It would be equity sharing, and it's not. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Ray Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to all the elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south in the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet, and north of the border are the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani of the Confederacy. Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, had signatures that included the Blackfoot Confederacy. There was a lot of confusion by Reverend McDougall about Treaty 6 and Treaty 7. So the Wesley, formerly Wesley, now Goodstoney Nation, the Chiniki and Bearspaw Nations of the Stoney Nations, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina are also a part of Treaty 7. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. Also, giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe, and you can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And just, again, emphasizing whatever podcast system you listen from, thank you, whether it's Spotify or there's so many now, iTunes, Google Play, etc. Thank you for listening. So a lot has happened. I first and foremost want to thank David Lowery, Voices in Recovery podcast, for having me on. So they're under the Freedom Pass Society, if you want to go check out that podcast instead of listening to this one or adding to your collection, one of many. This one matters a lot to us. My husband produces both of those podcasts, this one and David Lowery's, and we talked a lot about some of the things that are happening in Alberta politics, kind of a rundown of what happened, and talked a lot about LGBTQ2+. And I think I'm going to talk a lot about that. I wanted to just replay it here, but so much has happened in the week since he aired it to right now. I want to start by acknowledging Taylor McNally and Adora Nufur. They are two Black activists here in Calgary. We know the stats. For folks who follow me on social media, you'll see all of the reports that come out on Black Canadians and how they are mistreated within the justice system. And we get to see that firsthand here in Calgary. They did us a public service. These are heroes. These are humanitarians. They did us a favor by trying to shed more light on the racism and death happening in Calgary by police officers, by the justice system. And they had a long protest, a week-long protest in front of the Calgary courts. And from that, it's so ironic because the videos are out there to show how Taylor McNally was attacked by Alberta sheriffs, and yet somehow the courts ruled in favor of the Alberta sheriffs. And now Taylor McNally has to wait for sentencing. And I'm so shocked. I thought anybody who's seen those videos would know that there's no way that she could be convicted of this. So I've been sharing her legal defense fund. I really encourage people, if you have some money, even if it's $5, if you can contribute to that. Her lawyer, well-respected Chad Haggerty, he was a former RCMP police officer, now lawyer, wonderful man as well. He's trying to help Taylor McNally. We have Dora Newfer, who apparently was charged with some kind of hate crime. And then they said, oh, it was a clerical error. And for folks who have never had to deal with hate crimes, it is next to impossible to get the system to charge somebody with a hate crime. So I have the most difficult time believing that was a clerical error. Either way, both are under incredible amounts of legal scrutiny, and we all know why. They want to paint both of them as, angry, violent Black women. Here's the truth. What I know of both Adora and Taylor are the two sweetest people I know. I know I trigger their trauma. I trigger a lot of people's trauma, unfortunately. But I know they are two loving mothers who are trying their damn best to do the best they can as single mothers, trying to protect their Black children from this racist, anti-Black system, a corrupt justice system at all levels. And we get to see it firsthand. So if you at all are trying to defend them or to defend the system, you are absolutely not the people that need to be in my circle. You are not safe for my community or anybody else's for that matter. And I really encourage people to donate to their legal funds because this is ridiculous. And I know watching our Indigenous peoples go through this time in and time again, the discrimination, the hate shown towards Indigenous and Black peoples by the justice system. And I can't believe that people aren't on the streets protesting in favor of Taylor and Adora. You know, the other reason why I felt I had to have a solo podcast was we had this incident with Awaton Healing Lodge's board of directors, not the staff. Staff are amazing people. And, unfortunately, it's been taken over by a disproportionate of non-Indigenous people. And they're trying to show that they've had ties to the Indigenous community, but you can't understand. And their record really speaks for themselves on how they're not actually committed to the very vision that they claim to be. So as a result, Bruce Skelplock, Dr. Linda Many Guns, they proposed a 4-day protest, and today was day one. So I went to McDougall, and while I was there, they went for a small walk around with singing songs and with their posters to try to raise awareness on a Sunday afternoon on Father's Day. And while they were walking around, the security of McDougall immediately told me to leave and that we all had to leave. And I said, we won't be doing that, that it is our rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for us to be at McDougall. And not only are we going to stay, but we're going to stay until 2. And we're going to do it again Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And he didn't like that. And he told me that the Alberta sheriffs are asking me to leave. And I said, well, I guess they'll have to come and arrest me because I'm not leaving. This is a provincial building. The public have the right to protest here. And he didn't come back out after that. But it was, for folks who don't understand, it is really hard as a person. I identify, frankly, as a mother, just trying to stand up for our rights as Indigenous people. And I'm expected to, say no to security and Alberta sheriffs, and they don't like it. And we see right in real time what they're doing to Taylor McNally and Adora Newfor. And it's wrong. And for anybody who can defend this, here's the real problem that we're having right now. The other reason why I had to have a podcast. We have so much hate against the LGBTQ2+ community right now. It is supposed to be Pride Month. Even by colonial standards, it's supposed to be their month. Instead, we have a huge rise of parents with this religious programming that have taken it upon themselves to try to unite across different conservative religions and unite against the LGBTQ2+. And I can't understand that either. Nazis went after that community. And there's a real movement to try to eliminate the T. And I'm sorry, but if you identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and you think for a second the people willing to eliminate the T aren't willing to eliminate you, you are dead wrong. They are. That's what the Nazis taught us. Fascism, it's so clearly in front of us, and how folks can't see that, I don't understand. So I've been trying to raise awareness. The very folks that are part of Take Back Alberta, Take Back Canada, they're the ones infiltrating boards all across. If you listen to the rhetoric, they want, very right-wing conservative folks taking over boards. And that's what we're seeing in real time in Awaton and other organizations. We're seeing Indigenous people being kicked out of these organizations over and over. And it's wanted, it's militant. And, we have a new UCP non-status Cree And I find it interesting watching him trying to be with the other Indigenous caucus, knowing his own party are Indian residential school deniers. And we can't tolerate this, folks. There was a new report released about the findings of the 215, and the call to action for Canadians were to do more, call out this denialism. Folks who have listened to my podcast previously know I have spoken about Sean Carlton. He's a professor that was originally here in Calgary and moved to Manitoba, and he talks on Indian residential school denialism. I get really upset because, for anybody who's done any work, any Googling, just a simple Google search, you would know that Jack White Goose Flying was moved from Glenmore Circle in Deerfoot to the Queen Cemetery so that we could expand on, that whole Glenmore Circle of capitalism. When the floods happened, a bunch of bodies were exposed and had to be reburied. And for folks who paid attention at all in Red Deer, the Indian industrial school that was there had so many children that died that they had to close it earlier, and they moved those bodies to the cemetery. So for folks to say that there's no proof, there's no bodies, I don't know what kind of hate in your heart you have to have, but I know that our elders have witnessed that hate in people's heart for decades. They've been telling their stories to this type of hate and rhetoric. So for settlers who are listening, I'd love to hear how you are doing the work. We just had this Awaton march on the day 1 of 4. And as far as I could see, there was only 3 settlers who came. A husband of one of our sisters, one person from TikTok that I see, and both were from the Reconciliation Action Group, trying to do some of that work by standing with us. So I'm really hoping that, if you're a settler listening to this right now and you're like, oh, but I'm in Ontario, it still applies to you. There's still Indigenous-led protests. There are still Indigenous-led reconciliation groups that are worth your time and energy to put effort towards. Even the one we have here in Calgary, we really have one settler doing a lot of the work. And we have another person who does all the graphics. I know that there are many people who have many skills to bring to these. And it was interesting, one of our friends who came to the protest, and he was on one of the boards that I won't name because I don't want to get in trouble, but his board, he was saying, yeah, of course we want the corporate money, but as soon as we do, then the settlers who are giving that money seem to think that they know best, and they know better, and try to take over our boards no matter what. So if you are a Canadian settler and you're sitting on an Indigenous board, I beg of you to amplify the Indigenous voices on your board. You may think you know best, but do you? Do you know what it's like to be Indigenous? Do you know what it's like to wake up to at least 3 levels of hate, from the institutions to individual to each other? No, you don't. You don't get that. So you don't understand. If you haven't read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission or the National Inquiry Report, you literally have no business sitting on a Indigenous board. It is shocking to me how many people think that they know best for us, and that is exactly perpetuating colonialism. So I beg of you, if you are a non-Indigenous person sitting on an Indigenous board, what are you doing to recruit Indigenous people to that position? And if you're an Indigenous person, I know you have to put up with a lot of racism being at these boards. That's why when I see people at them, I give them that respect and that nod, because I know what they're going through. So my hope is that people will understand the gravity of colonialism that perpetuates today. It is shocking to me how many people still don't understand how we're undergoing genocide because of all of these issues. I'll never forget one of the executive directors of a women's shelter pretending like a girl that she knew wasn't a missing and murdered Indigenous girl after everything she knew. And it just shows me that even people in these positions of power are not reading these reports that are critical to understanding Indigenous people, and then have the audacity to be like, oh, what more can I do? So I wanted to kind of encapsulate a lot of that into one podcast in the hopes that people understand. So if you were one of the, I think they said around 70 memberships were denied to members of Awaton by this non-Indigenous board to the Indigenous community. And so that's at least 70 people that could have joined us in these protests. And I understand today is Father's Day and it was a little rainy, but for folks who don't know, man, Calgary has been undergoing the biggest heat wave. So for this little Satu Dene, I tell you, it's been a much needed relief having this cold weather. So I've been sick. We've had really smoky air, and I have this cough. I can't control it anymore. I don't know. I might have asthma or something. I'll have to go to the doctor and find out. But I definitely have a raging headache most days as a result. And I just can't stand this heat anymore. Anyway, so it's been really hot. So today was a bit of a reprieve. It is Father's Day, but I still wish that people would be willing to see that, my own husband, he says, I'm a father every day. I don't understand why we need this one day. So he really respected the understanding of me going to this protest. And it's just shocking to me how many other spouses don't. The stats are there. I know my husband's 1 in a million who, doesn't beat me, doesn't treat me poorly, who respects me, who works with me. I'm sad at the stats here in Alberta of how bad it is. So anyway, I haven't really talked about the election, post-election, since the election in Alberta on this podcast. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we have at least 3 Indigenous people. We have Jody Stonehouse. We have, his name is blanking on me. Oh, he's a Two-Spirit young man, and he's just such a wonderful guy. I can't believe Arcan Brooks, Arcan. And his first name is blah, blah. Shoot, I hate this COVID brain. Brooks. That's not it. Anyway, he identifies as Two-Spirit. So I am really honored that he was able to get elected. I wish I had $1 million to give to him in his campaign, but obviously, hats off to Rachel Notley for having at least 2 winnable candidates in these positions, because that's a huge change. And unfortunately, because non-Indigenous media still can't understand the difference between Indigenous, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, there wasn't the celebration there should have been for Jody's being the first First Nation woman to be elected. It is such a black mark on the media here in Alberta for not properly recognizing her, and so-called allies falling over themselves when somebody said, oh, she's the first Indigenous. We know they meant First Nation, but they didn't even do that. They'd be like, no, she is not the First Nation. There was a Métis woman. And I'm like, yes, she was. But can we still acknowledge and celebrate Jody being the First Nation? So anyway, I do wish people understood the gravity of how great this moment is, having her in that position. Shame that Drew Farrell wasn't elected. I'm sad for Beau, because they could have had a really good representative. And I know it would be hard to be at opposition for the NDP anyway, but one more, and we're kind of close enough, folks, that if enough people cross the floor to the NDP, because I know all of you think NDP are progressive, and I never have, never will. To me, they're conservatives in union coats, and that was obviously shown in Marilyn North Pagane's the way they treated her. But really excited to see at least 2 Indigenous people from the NDP elected. And I don't know much about this conservative, but we'll be watching him to see what he does or doesn't do, for that matter. And hopefully he'll stand up for Indigenous people in some capacity. For those who don't know, one of the commissioners for the TRC, Wilton Littlechild, he was a conservative, progressive conservative a long time ago. So he did serve and as a conservative. And he obviously has always stood for Indigenous rights. So the hope is that we can have at least one more conservative using those talking points too. Lots happened with Danielle Smith since she has been elected as premier, but I just think people are kind of stupid splitting hairs over her wearing sandals in her restaurant. But what is something to be said that I'm sad that the media isn't really talking about is the fact that she had done these selfies in her family restaurant and then, boasted about it on her government of Alberta feeds. And then the next day, that business was suddenly up for sale. And so, that is a huge conflict of interest. Obviously, we never did get over the leadership irregularities for Jason Kenney getting elected. So I'm sure absolutely no police officer is going to lift a finger on any of these ethic violations. That's for sure. These ethics issues, and then the other point is that it really bothers me is how conservatives are so quick to talk about Justin Trudeau in such a negative way, but they never point the finger back at the conservatives for all the shady stuff that they do. And it's just so disappointing. So anyway, speaking of the Liberal Party of Canada that I brought up on my own podcast, today Justin Trudeau dropped the writ for Calgary Heritage. So the Conservative MP stepped down, and as a result, they were forced to have a by-election. So I was door knocking yesterday for the Liberal Day of Action with Elliot Weinstein. He is going to be the Liberal candidate for Calgary Heritage, and that E-Day will be July 24th. So I am pretty sure I must have a pretty low number of people that live in Calgary Heritage that listen to this podcast. But if you happen to live in that riding, man, I would love to hear from you. And I'll tell you why. I'm really excited for this by-election. And I'm excited for it for no other reason than we are going to have a by-election during the Calgary Stampede in Stephen Harper's former riding. And that means ministers from across the freaking country are going to be here for the Stampede. The Prime Minister will likely be here for the Stampede. And if I am able to go door knocking with the Prime Minister in Stephen Harper's former riding, that might be a day I just, died and went to heaven. So for folks listening, if you want to get involved, that's not the only by-election. There are other by-elections. There's a Métis woman in Manitoba that I'm watching, Winnipeg South. Her name is Carrie Smith. She is a Métis. I want her to win. I hope that people if you were in that riding, I'd love to hear from you too, to see what your thoughts on the election are there. There are other by-elections happening as well. Really excited for the results of that because, we're in a close race right now. There's enough by-election. Could you imagine if we turned over enough people that, that minority got even bigger or maybe got a little smaller? How great would that be? So I'm hoping. And for folks who hate Justin Trudeau, here's the thing. Justin Trudeau is the first one to invest into Indigenous people at an unprecedented rate. That is the bottom line. Prior to Justin Trudeau, there was no freaking Excel worksheet on how many nations had drinking water or didn't. Then there was certainly no plan to fix it. And election after election, Harper did not care about it. He outright said missing and murdered Indigenous women is not on his radar. Pierre Poilievre has said so many anti-Indigenous things. To me, was a huge proponent of the convoy. He went there with Tim Hortons and donuts and encouraged some of these folks who we know are far right. I will never understand how, as Indigenous people, we could never be plotting to kill RCMP. And yet here they did and non-Indigenous people did at Coutts here in Alberta, and nothing came of that. Meanwhile, Taylor McNally, her kids are in this freaking school that she's defending, and she gets charged. like our world is so upside down when it comes to injustice. And I just would really love to understand how, non-racialized people who might listen to this podcast, like how do you make peace with this? Like how do you, not amplify the voices of more of these people and talk about the injustices of this? Like I can't understand that. But I guess that's why genocide continues on Black and Indigenous peoples, right? So just those are some of the talks I wanted to talk about. Again, listen to David Lowry's Voices in Recovery podcast. He's a part of this umbrella called Freedom's Path. So I hope you can find that podcast and listen to that one in particular episode. I actually really encourage all the episodes because it really talks about an issue which I care a lot about, which is the addiction issues and on the road and recovery and talking about traumas that really is the root issue when it comes to addiction. So he's a registered social worker and does great work out in the community every single day. One of my favorite people, and we're lucky enough to be friends with him. So I hope you consider listening to that. So I talked about Taylor, talked about Adora, talked about David's podcast, talked about Awaton. For folks who are interested in helping what we're doing right now, Dr. Linda Manyguns, who has lowercase for the D, the L, and the M, she has really been leading this. So please follow her Facebook. She's not great at social media by her own admission, so she had asked me to do a lot of that work. And then she had another friend make a beautiful poster. So that went out as well. And if you can at all contribute, that would be wonderful. And if and when they call this AGM, which is right now secret, which it should never be, if you are a lawyer who knows the Societies Act, maybe you can help lodge a complaint, whatever that looks like, so that we can move forward with a positive, constructive board that cares about its membership and cares about the spirit of having, elders and spirituality, our Indigenous spirituality at the center, and allowing Indigenous people at the board and not letting them go, and having more Indigenous peoples in leadership positions. It is shocking to me what is happening there. And I know Ruth Skelplock, the founder of Awaton, and many of the elders are incredibly upset, but they're not on social media. So we're hoping that over the next, Ruth will be there here going forward. So if you can be there, I think on Tuesday, I think is the day she will be there. Anyway, if you are lucky enough to go listen to Dr. Linda Manyguns, even for 5 minutes, you are a richer person for it. She's obviously been a past guest on this podcast as well. If you want to listen to some of the words that she has said previously, not about Awaton, but just in general, and hear a little more about her story. She's an amazing human being, and we are a richer world because she's in it, and grateful for the advocacy that she does. And I wanted to just end on that so that people know more about what they can do, and hopefully we can get some Indigenous people elected as board of directors, but also in leadership as well, because this is ridiculous and it's just a shame. It's just a shame to have Indigenous people being rejected by the very lodge that we all want to support. It's not very many things that we agree with in this city, but that is one of them. That is for sure. So anyway, really upset about what's happening with Adora and Taylor. Please follow them if you have an opportunity to help with their legal funds. That would be even better. But at the minimum, if you could share what is happening with them, that would be really appreciated. My last podcast was obviously chapter 11 of the book club. And I hope that folks got a chance to listen to the calls to justice and some of our thoughts around the calls to justice. And if not, maybe a prompt to read them for folks who hadn't. We just finished up another book club that I hope to get aired here, and it was Michelle's Good Five Little Indians. Such a great book. I have nothing but accolades to say about what it's like for Indigenous people post residential school and how poorly they were treated. Very similar with Scooped Kids and how they are treated by the social work system. Speaking of which, there is a situation out in Airdrie where some Inuk are really being held hostage. And there's going to be a meeting that's coming up on Tuesday evening to try to talk about the permits that they're being held within, in hopes that maybe we can get some movement of these folks who are not getting proper care and are, mandated to stay in facilities while not being, criminals in any capacity. This world, I swear to God, and that's what's happening in Canada today. And yet a lot of people are really ignorant of it because our mainstream media, they won't, right now they're covering the Nazis that are like, let's eliminate the LGBTQ2 plus. It is shocking to me that they're both siding that issue. It's a damn shame. I guess the last thing I should talk about, it's not just the queer community, but it's also our community, the Indigenous community and the Muslim community. The thing about racism, and this is the best example we have of it right now in oppression dynamics, is when you have, structural oppression that we see against the Muslim, Indigenous, and queer community, and then you have this individual hate where you just get it from an average Joe. But then you have the oppression dynamics of internal oppression dynamics. So you'll have some members of the LGBTQ plus, some members of Muslims, some members of the Indigenous community fighting with each other, wasting that energy, all of that energy that should be directed at the structure of oppression, but instead is being with each other. What do I mean by that? So I mean that while I'm at a protest trying to listen to the people talking about their issues, sharing their traumas, I am being inundated with private messages from somebody who felt slighted. I didn't put enough hearts around a conversation, didn't say enough thank yous. And I'm trying to be at a protest. So that's why I just kind of quit acknowledging a lot of my messages from folks because, and friend requests for that matter, because I just can't even, I can't bother with other people's trauma. I talk about this on every podcast, how, we all have trauma. And when I trigger your trauma and you start triggering mine, when I'm already traumatized from a security guard telling me that I have to leave, this is why activists burn out so quick. Not to mention in the case of like Taylor and Adora, where you actually have the justice system purposely targeting them, coming after them in such a negative, awful way. It's just heartbreaking watching this and watching our so-called allies stand by and do almost nothing. And we've seen it a bit in the queer community, where, you have somebody who identifies in that community say, I'm showing up and I am absolutely fighting this fascism. And the other part of the queer community is like, well, we don't agree because we don't want there to be, anti-Muslim rhetoric or whatever. And it's like, well, this is my fucking life, so thanks a lot. And you get to see that infighting. And this is what colonialism has done. They have created this with the oppression dynamics, and they thrive as a result. Whereas we, have the opposite. And I've seen it in the Muslim community, where you had Muslims that understood the, rights of Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, talking to ones who clearly don't, and were anti-LGBTQ2 plus. So shout out to Saima and Sam here in Calgary for trying to engage in a constructive way with Muslim community. There wasn't that many. I think it was like, 25 families that were there, maybe. And, this is what really pissed me off the most about that freaking rally that happened Friday. There was a known criminal that the Calgary police wanted that was there. And sure enough, because he's white, he sure didn't get arrested. How is it our side can take pictures, show it, and it still not be arrested? I was so infuriated hearing that. Anyway, That's a typical day in Calgary. And so much happened between when David's podcast was released to now that I felt like I had to do my own podcast instead of just replaying his. So I don't know if I will. I doubt I will because I still have some other book clubs that I'd rather put out there. But if you have comments or questions, please don't hesitate. And if you are on my TikTok asking me to educate you, sorry, I don't do that. You can pay me. Anyway, it is Aboriginal Awareness Week, the biggest one we have here in Calgary for this week, and so many events. So if you go to Calgary Aboriginal Awareness Week, you will find a ton of events that many of us in the Indigenous community will be at. And I hope to see you there. Please don't hesitate to come up and say hi. And I promise you, for as many people who love me, as many hate me. So, just let me know if you're a friend or foe, and come chat with me, because I'd love to talk to you if we're actually at a mutual event. And for that, I will also say a lot of the Calgary Awards went out, and I don't know who took the time to nominate me, but I want to say thank you. I know I didn't win, but it's not the point. I know how hard it is to corral people and get those, letters of references out there and such. So I just want to say thank you to whoever nominated me. Just being nominated was nice enough because I know how much work it is to put together that application and letters of support. Thank you. Thank you. And for that, I think I'm done for today. And if you have some free time and you want to do positive politics, don't hesitate to sign up at liberal.ca for some volunteer shifts. You can phone bank, whichever. It doesn't matter where you are in the city or where you are across the country. You can help by election. All you have to do is sign up at liberal.ca and go from there. And if you're Indigenous, boy, I want to talk to you, because I want to encourage you. If you have any barriers, if there's something stopping you, please let me know, because I'd love to know. Oh, one last thing. I had a friend who did not take my Narcan, and she said she wasn't educated enough on it. So if you're Indigenous and you're not feeling educated enough on Narcan, please reach out, because we have to save each other's lives here. That's what this is about. And I hope that over time we can educate you to feel comfortable enough that every single freaking Canadian should have a naloxone kit. But the other part is that every Canadian should feel comfortable talking to Indigenous people enough to save their life if their lips are blue when they're not breathing. Holy. And it's not just Indigenous, it's non-Indigenous too. It's just disproportionately Indigenous and Black people. So anyway, I think I got out a lot of the things I need to get out. I'm definitely still feeling the adrenaline rush from the trauma of talking to security. So I'm hoping that it was more than coherent. Anyway, I want to encourage people who aren't a part of a book club to consider starting one, if not joining mine. It's national, so anyone can join it. I'll just have to send you the Zoom link. And for July 10th, our next one will be volume 1B of the final report, pages 219 to 349. And that will finish the final report for us. And we'll finally be done the national inquiry. It was a lot, 2 big volumes, let me tell you. August 14th is Our Voice of Fire by Brandy Morin. September 11th is a public document by the government of Alberta called 113 Pathways to Justice, the recommendations of the Alberta Joint Working Group on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. On October 9th, we have Cree lawyer Harold Johnson's book, Peace and Good Order, The Case for Indigenous Justice. November 13th, we have a report to guide the implementation of a national action plan of violence against women and gendered violence. See, to me, I'm excited to read that for no other reason than to understand why there's a duplication. Because we have non-Indigenous that just can't seem to connect the dots, but the national inquiry helps all the LGBTQ2 plus community, not just some. So I'm assuming our November one is a nice whitewash for white people, white women, and for white LGBTQ. But I hope I'm wrong. I'm just certain I'm right, because the national inquiry would help people there. regardless, that's a public document for folks that are interested in learning about it as well. And then finally, in December, we have Making Space for Indigenous Feminism, edited by Joyce Green. So I'd love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, and please join. And also, if you're in Calgary, please consider joining the Reconciliation Action Group. We have a group that, we just ask people to show up to our meetings and to do some of the actions that we ask. And it is shocking. We have over 1 million people. And really, there's only a couple of people doing that work. And that's kind of unacceptable, folks. I don't understand what it is that Canadians don't see themselves as part of the solution. It shouldn't even be Indigenous people doing the work. It should be non-Indigenous, but yet here we are. Anyway, I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions and in cultural safety training and cultural first aid in all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous people of color, those with disabilities, and to us LGBTQ2 to speak. If you go to heretohelp.bc.ca, there's a wonderful bit on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. You can thank Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin for that work. Those are cultural action tools. So please support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation work and settler understanding. I'm just lucky enough to highlight it here. Internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence people that are oppressed face. So Donna Bevins has a wonderful resource called racialequitytools.org. She has resource files. She has a whole piece on what is internalized racism. Again, if you have some money to give, don't hesitate to give it to them as well. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. So that's afsc.org. Go to bystander intervention. Tons of great information there. Anyone that follows me on social media, I wish that you would follow the anti-racism organizational lead for the city of Calgary. I have this internal ARAC committee that did a presentation on the journey of becoming an anti-racism leader. Let me know if you've watched it. I did. I thought it was great. Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize the marginalized in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, if they are cutting violence prevention programs, services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, know that your vote is going to a party that directly negatively impacts marginalized people. I actually found out after the fact. I had an uncle that he couldn't vote for NDP because they are pro-Indigenous people. And I thought, wow, at least I know where I'm not safe. Anyway, demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendation of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, multiple reports about child welfare reform and violence prevention, the 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry, as well as a lot of the other reports that I mentioned in my book club. Provincially, we have the 113 pathways to justice. So we'll see what movement gets done there. It is just so disappointing to see people not talk about that during the election because they know it's not an election topic they'd win on. Conservatives and union coats, folks. Anyway, you can Google our articles on how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies. And Stephanie Harp and I did an emergency podcast in the hopes that we could reach our allies to talk about more about the crises that we're facing. She's been doing really great work with the Aboriginal Alert network. So you can go to aboriginalalert.ca to follow up and get on their list. And she's been doing outreach with the Missing Children Society of Canada about their app and Indigenous people being a part of that. So let's support her on that. If you go to womenshomelessness.ca, you can see the statement for urgent action to protect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people experiencing homelessness. I was just at the C train station and I saw a new amputation, and I just thought, that probably happened over Christmas when the city of Calgary thought it was a great idea to take all the doors off to transit. And how Calgarians are A-okay with it, I will never respect that. Anyway, this government's failure to properly respond to this crisis is costing lives, costing taxpayers, and using up already scarce resources in our overburdened ambulance and hospital systems, despite the rhetoric Ms. Smith told you over the election. If you know somebody that's using substances, please encourage them not to use alone. If you are using a loan, please contact the National Overdose Response Service at 888-688-NORS, or you can also download the Brave or Doors apps. Another one that Dr. Ewan talked about was Lifeguard, so encourage those as well. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything I talked about today and need to call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 855-242-3310, please do. It is toll free, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also go to hopeforwellness.ca. For more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, you can call 844-413-6649. For non-Indigenous, you can always call your distress center lines in your area, and at times you have a functioning 211. You can also call 833-456-4566, or you can text at 45645. You can go to crisisservicescanada.ca for even more. Wanted to say that there is a show on Netflix called Bluebird, and it's about the 60 Scoop. So anyway, 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta, ssisa.ca. And there's currently playing in select theaters Bones of Crows, which is more of an Indigenous view of what residential schools were actually like, as opposed to a Canadian whitewashed view. Indian Residential School Survivor and Family Hotline, 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone, 1-800-668-6868. Native Youth Crisis Hotline, 1-877-209-1266. Right now, all LGBTQ+ are under attack. I can't emphasize that enough to my listeners. If you can at all support your youth, this is what they need right now. Maybe give some money to the Trevor Project. They do the best work when it comes to trying to support the community. Anyway, for the youth, you can call 866-844-7386. Trans Lifeline is 877-330-6366. You can also go to lifevoice.ca. There's tons of crisis supports for folks who might need it. Violence is my everyday reality. Every generation has faced it. This is self-care, how I take my power back. This is why I started the podcast, to speak freely without interruption, without tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions. As many people don't want to hear Indigenous opinion, sure want to tell us theirs, sure want to tell us how to run an event that they don't even show up to, by people who know nothing about us. Colonialism, the constant surveillance of Indigenous people, our protests, our vigils, and our rights. I and many others share info on microaggressions daily, so it is unacceptable to say them anymore. Learn about being trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism and gatekeeping. We're dealing with surviving our folks who survive off the status quo, folks who are so in their trauma, they stop people from doing the work and deplete time and resources. Masi Cho to my ancestors, to my granny, to my mom, of what strength looks like through their example. Want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt. Happy Father's Day, Dad. My stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots, and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. Through her, I'm second generation Calgarian. To my husband, Darcy, Big Buffalo Rockman, for not just producing and editing the show. Happy Father's Day. You have been my husband, childhood friend, father of our child, support down my journey of the Red Road, witnessed decades of racism and sexism, and to our child, Thunderpipe Necklace Woman. We are blessed to learn from you daily, and we are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I hope my daughter and my family will be proud in the future, trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they can understand down the road. One other thing I wanted to give a plug for. My daughter was going to go to Camp Firefly, but then chose not to because of the timing. As a result, I just wanted to say it was actually very expensive. And if you have time and money or corporate sponsorship to put towards Camp Firefly, maybe it would help a few Indigenous youth be able to attend it. Um, yeah. Anyway, just want to throw that out there for folks who have money. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel. You can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And yeah, just want to thank everybody who's donated, whether $1 or more. I just can't thank you enough for your support. I want to end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, "Are you be in my dish?" But I also want to say my new dog Hugo, holy shit. I hope he doesn't get those rabbits, but I tell you, he's hunting you three. And I think it's really funny that I have a hunter of rabbits, and I'm like, no, we're trying to have treaty. And he's like, no, mom, I'm gonna hunt these rabbits anyway. Hope you enjoyed listening, and look in the preamble for the link to donate to Taylor McNally and to Adora Nufor. Thanks for listening.